It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. In 1954, Godzilla burst onto the scene as an allegory for the destruction of Japan in World War II, and as the years went on, the series would occasionally brush up against other issues or concepts or attitude in contemporary Japan, but it really wasn't until this week's movie, 1971's Godzilla vs. Hedorah, also known as Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster, that Godzilla decided to step back into the ring of important issues affecting the people of Japan. So, despite Destroy All Monsters being intended for the final film in this franchise, Toho wasn't entirely done with Godzilla. First, as I mentioned last week, they tried to work with American animation studio Filmation to make a cartoon series. When that fell through, they switched gears and cranked out another film. They often derided All Monsters Attack, aka Godzilla's Revenge. But despite a lot of people being critical of the hard turn toward being overtly child-friendly with All Monsters Attack, and that movie does have many things to be understandably irritated at, if you're one of the people who don't like that movie, Godzilla survived planned obsolescence. Well, ailing producer of the Godzilla films Tomoyuki Tanaka offered director Yoshimitsu Banno the opportunity to make a Godzilla film. This would be Banno's only Godzilla film, and that's because Banno admitted to two things. First, when Tanaka's health forced him to be hospitalized during much of the production of the film, Banno used that to do something kind of infamous in the Godzilla series. Second, when he added this thing, and you better believe we're going to be talking about that when it comes up, Tanaka had a conniption fit and claimed to basically loathe the film and Banno, and it effectively banned Banno from making another film in the series. But let's talk about Banno's inspiration for creating a smog monster. While traveling around Japan, he was inspired by seeing cities covered in thick clouds of smog. Cities on the coast would find a lot of foamy crud from dumped laundry detergent washed up on the shore. As industrialization continued to pump more and more crud into the environment, the 70s were proving to be a decade that would speak heavily about taking care of the earth. And that's pretty much everywhere, all across the world. Earth Day was created in the early 70s. That commercial with the crying Native American guy, when people litter on the side of the road, that was out there. The concern of leaded gasoline, and an alien smog monster fighting Godzilla. These concepts were everywhere at the time, and it was important to think about environmental issues. This is truly an interesting film. Most critics in Japan immediately dismissed it, but Godzilla vs. Hedorah is well known for being the favorite film in the series for Nicolas Cage, Roger Ebert, and the director of the most recent Godzilla and Kong films in the MonsterVerse, Adam Wingard. In fact, Banno would go on to consistently offer follow-ups to this film as either sequels or re-envisioning pretty much for the rest of his life. While none of those proposals had anything come from them, one of those proposals did inspire the story for the American 2014 Godzilla film, and that opened the door for him to act as an executive producer on that film. But let's talk about this wild mixed media art film known as Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Right out of the gate, we're shown instances of factories pumping out smoke and pollution into the air before seeing some floating grossness in water and in the ocean. Popping its head up from underwater in the muck is our main villain of the movie, Hedorah. The credits launch into the film's theme song about saving the world from pollution. And if you haven't noticed yet, this movie is all about making the perfect dish of flapjacks. Nah, I'm kidding. It's obviously a movie that shifts Godzilla from a creature created by the radiation and awfulness of our weaponry to the savior of the world as he battles another threat of our own creation. And that is how we treat our planet. His coming to humanity's aid almost even becomes a supernatural revelation as well. which we will soon learn in the story. But as the story kind of picks up from the credits, a local fisherman in Suruga Bay first saw a monster that attacked a tanker, but then also provided a local doctor, Toru Yano, with a specimen that looks like a giant mutated tadpole. Now, after seeing a news report about the attack on the tanker, Dr. Yano decides that he's going to go and get some samples himself. So he goes into the sea to look for more samples and some more biomatter or something that could give a little bit more information about this tadpole that he's received, as well as the news report. Now, as he does this, his son Ken waits on the shore for his return. And as Ken waits for his father, Hedorah approaches in the water and leaps over a part of the little rocky shore that Ken was on before landing on the other side of that jutted out piece of rocky shore to return back into the sea. But this leads to Hedorah basically coming into contact, stalking, and attacking Dr. Yano. The doctor eventually returns to land, but he's got a terrible scar on the right side of his face. Even Ken has a scar on his hand from coming into contact with Hedorah. And more reports of Hedorah attacking oil tankers are heard on news reports. And what's more, the more pollution it comes into contact with, the larger Hedorah becomes. Now, Ken begins to believe that Godzilla will be pretty upset about the pollution and will ultimately be the one who will save the world. And he's getting this from dreams. So it's almost as if he's now having this kind of supernatural contact with Godzilla, and he's telling Godzilla that there's muck out there in the form of Hedorah, and Godzilla's telling him that he's going to take care of it. It's wild, my friends. But meanwhile, Dr. Yano studies the tadpole-like creature that the fisherman brought to him, and he discovers that after being removed from water, the tadpole is essentially flaking and falling into pieces, almost like coal. It's completely and totally dried out. And he discovers that it's almost like a mineral in the way that its structure is. So when he places flakes of the creature into water, they become tiny versions of the tadpole Hedorah, and their main goal is to try to recombine into a singular, larger creature. The concerned thought is that it seems to be limitless on how large this creature can grow. Now, Hedorah continues to evolve. Eventually, it becomes amphibious and goes onto land to suck some black smoke coming out of smokestacks at a factory. And but as it does that, though, Godzilla makes landfall too and wants to know what this monster's business is. A fight breaks out, and Godzilla grabs Hedorah by its tail, spins it around, and then tosses it into the city where Hedorah kind of leaves behind some sentient like sludge or something. And it's a sludgy, oily material that landed inside of this building and killed everyone in it. Now, Hedorah's sludge oozes into a nightclub, but then retreats, leaving only a sludge-covered kitten. I can't believe... it's crazy. It's like, it's one thing to put people into sludge or whatever, but they coated this kitten in this sludgy crap. And in a way it's meant to be kind of a cute little scene, but at the same time, it's like, this thing is something that humans are terrified of, and you want to cover a kitten in it. But anyway, whatever. Outside in the port town, Hedorah tries spitting a corrosive gunk at Godzilla, and it does sting the Godzilla's shoulder, but it's really not enough to defeat him. So Godzilla tries bashing Hedorah with some atomic breath and some punches and so forth, but it doesn't really seem to do much to the creature. In fact, Godzilla's a little bit confused by it. But eventually Hedorah returns to the sea with Godzilla in pursuit. And the next day it's discovered that Hedorah leaves behind some sort of acidic substance that is to blame for pretty much all the deaths in the town that night. It's a little bit more awful than that. Simply by flying over the city, he has a acidic kind of noxious sulfuric acid kind of chemtrail, if you will, that comes from behind him, and it's enough to choke people that he flies over. It causes oil refineries to explode. The fumes are even able to choke Godzilla. Now, as he continues to spray this all over town, after Hedorah gets away from Godzilla and flies over the city again, his fumes have now become powerful enough to reduce people to skeletons and can even collapse metal structures. Now, concerns grow as Hedorah is obviously evolving at a very quick pace. It began as a water creature, then a walking land creature. Now it can fly and mist everything under with a sulfuric acid. So what's next? The scientists don't know, and the government is seemingly powerless as the people demand to know where the Defense Force is and what they will do to stop Hedorah. And hope is soon leaving the population. And it's decided that a friend of Ken's family decides to throw one last party or convergence of some sort to get as many people as possible to Mount Fuji, where he believes Hedorah's final victory will be at, and his final evolution will occur at, and basically wipe out all of humanity. So it's kind of like the party at the end of the world, if you will. Now, meanwhile, Dr. Yano and Ken are kind of messing about with Hedorah and trying to figure out ways to stop the creature. And it's actually Ken who suggests simply drying it out. After all, Hedorah is just a creature made of sludge. And Dr. Yano figures out a way to set up 2 electrodes that basically sets off a charge that will dry the muck up almost instantly. And he's able to test it with with some of the revived pieces of that tadpole creature that he's placed in the water to kind of bring it back to life. Now, at Mount Fuji, Ken receives a telepathic message from Godzilla announcing, hey, the Godzilla is here, which also means that Hedorah must be in the area as well. And the 2 monsters fight, but Hedorah turns out to be a little bit too powerful at this point. He's grown to be a little bit bigger than Godzilla, and the sulfuric acid attacks that Hedorah possesses is a bit too much for Godzilla. In fact, it has basically made him lose an eye and all of the skin on one of his hands. And after flying past Godzilla, Hedorah approaches the people at the Mount Fuji party and gasses them to death before slowly marching at the remaining partiers. Hedorah kills most of the partiers, including the friend of the family that Ken refers to as an uncle, before Godzilla intervenes to kill the remaining people, including Ken. See, Godzilla and Ken are telepathically linked, almost as if he's specifically protecting Ken, and Ken has notified Godzilla of what's kind of going on in places. It's weird, my friends, but Godzilla becomes badly injured and almost killed in the fight, which ends with Hedorah trying to drown Godzilla in a pool of the muckety, sludgy stuff that Hedorah produces. But Dr. Yano arrives at Mount Fuji with the plans for the electrodes in which the Japanese Self-Defense Force agreed to employ to attempt to destroy Hedorah. And the monster is lured between the 2 electrodes and gets zapped. And Hedorah collapses, and Godzilla approaches the pile of gunk that was Hedorah and begins digging into its body. And inside the body, there are these 2 white orbs that are not explained in the least. More on that here in a little bit. But Hedorah's original tadpole form basically shoots out of the dried out husk of what was the evolved body of Hedorah, and Godzilla gives chase. And how does he give chase to a flying creature? Well, he turns around, balls himself up, and blasts some atomic breath that basically levitates him into the air and gives him propulsion as he flies backwards with his body kind of curled up in like a C format, like his tail comes up between his legs. And yeah, that was what pissed Tomoyuki Tanaka off and prevented Yoshimitsu Banno from ever getting another chance to make a Godzilla movie. That's the moment right there. And it's one of those things that becomes a visual centerpiece in talking about some of the silliness around Godzilla over the years. The dance in the Monster Zero movie when he celebrates defeating Ghidorah. This, and then there's something coming up here in a couple of weeks that is maybe the most infamous of them all. But anyway, Godzilla catches up with Hedorah, grabs him, and flies back to the electrodes to continue blasting the monster with the juice to dry him out. Eventually, Hedorah is reduced simply to dust, and Godzilla heads back to the sea, but first gives a look to the humans as if to tell us that he had to clean up our mess, and he's not going to be happy if he has to do it again. Let's do that thing where I come up with 3 things that I like about the movie. First, I called this something of a mixed media type of movie. There are scenes in which animations of Hedorah, called Happy Hedorah, is shown gaining more strength and power. The first time we see him drinking crude oil from a tanker. In another, he basically absorbs a polluting factory. The factory is represented by having these claws that keep grabbing at little plants that are growing up around it, as if to show that the factory itself is killing nature. Never mind what Hedorah will do, but once Hedorah kind of takes over that factory, it's bad news for everybody. But and then yet another, we see people going about their business in gas masks as Hedorah hovers ominously over them. It's very clear that these are easy to convey concepts that budget or opportunity to do so with the Hedorah prop or costume, that just simply wouldn't have been possible. However, it keeps to the idea that this is still kind of intended to reach a pretty young audience. Ken is a major character in this movie, and he was one of the first characters seen in the movie, and he was blessed of sorts with the visions of Godzilla and the ability to communicate with the monster. He names Hedorah. Ostensibly, he is the leading character of the movie, and while there are some extremely grim things in this movie, more on that in a moment, this is very clearly still being aimed at children. So, it's a younger audience for that might be more receptive to the primary concept behind the plot of environmental issues. So I do like the idea of the cartoons being mixed in for the littler kids. For teens and young adults, we have the nightclub with the trippy screens and psychedelic pop rock performed, and the trip out scene, which the friend of Ken's family, the one that he always refers to as uncle, starts to see everybody wearing fish masks. It's I'm pretty sure he's having a drug trip, but there's something visual there that mixes up the normal look of a Godzilla movie in this. And more on that in a little bit too, about the main creature, the monster Hedorah, as well. That really sets this one apart. Second, this movie, while I do still think that it's part of that era in which Godzilla is intended to be a property for kids, does have some pretty heavy and downright gross stuff in it. Godzilla is badly harmed in the movie. Hedorah's acidic nature caused him to lose an eye and all of his skin on his right hand in his battle with Hedorah. People are killed by being reduced to bones by Hedorah's acid. It doesn't even spare the young boy's family friend at Mount Fuji. It's a relatively dark movie, and the party at Mount Fuji was kind of intended to be portrayed as the final party before all life on Earth is exterminated. All of that is meant to warn us that we're killing ourselves. But anyway, there's a lot of symbolism too. Obviously, Godzilla was built on symbolism to begin with, but Hedorah is now the second creature created by our poor decisions. Each character also acts as a symbol of something as well. I don't think it's as easy to pick up on exactly. You have to really do a lot of thinking about what each character is, but that family friend of Ken's who dies at Mount Fuji was supposed to represent the idea of a collective effort that humans need to come together on to fix pollution. I think each character is supposed to represent all that is needed for humanity to right the ship, if you will. Obviously, the cartoons sell the idea of what Hedorah is doing to gain more power and essentially take over the world. But then, as I mentioned previously, there are those 2 orbs that Godzilla fished out of Hedorah's body. I've never seen what those orbs are exactly supposed to be. All I know is that Godzilla has to continuously punch into Hedorah's body to defeat him, and it's violent and gross, and he pulls out these 2 orbs. But my overall appreciation for this movie is that it does want to say something. It wants to be different. It doesn't just want to be 2 monsters punching each other and destroying cities. And I really do got to hand it to the makers of this movie for trying that something new. This was, I think, the 11th movie in the series, so it's like it would have been easy to fall back into, the tried and true, but this movie gets a little different and it tries to say things and tries to convey ideas, and not just live action monsters fighting each other, but also in those cartoons and those trippy nightclub scenes and stuff. But anyway, third, I like Hedorah a lot. In the Showa era, all of the Godzilla's combatants look like something we recognize. Godzilla himself, along with others like Rodan, Anguirus, Gorosaurus, and more, are all dinosaur-like creatures. Hedorah is a dragon. Even Rodan is, like I mentioned, was, he's a flying creature, but he's not a bird. He's like a pterodactyl or a pteranodon. We also have those giant bug monsters, the giant spider, the giant praying mantises, Mothra being 2 forms of a giant bug, the larva and the moth form, but you get it. Hedorah is none of those things. It's a monster made from shit, basically. And I mean it, seriously. All the muck, all the waste, all the crap we dump into the earth decided one day to stand up and start walking and killing us back. And he will kill you in many different ways. I mean, be it acid sludge or acidic vapors or blowing up the building you're standing in. Hedorah is going to kill you. Now, we still add a little sci-fi fantasy into the mix by saying that Hedorah came from somewhere in the Horsehead Nebula in space, but I'm not sure that that's actually spoken in the movie. I think it's part of the creature's bio, but it's only conjectured that Hedorah was an alien that used pollution to power himself. Now, I don't think Dr. Yano ever specifically landed on exactly where in space Hedorah came from, but still, how can you not like a gross crap monster going around and oozing diarrhea on everything? It's fun, it's gross, it's Hedorah, and I love him. That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new articles and reviews every Friday morning. Next time, Godzilla gets a theme park and a challenge from not one, but 2 threats from the depths of space in 1972's Godzilla vs. Gigan. Until next week, stay spooky.